Well, hi everybody, Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. I'm the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley. I'm the host of the Godcast, and I'm also the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, brief story, which is out now and is available online and in all good bookshops. My guest today on the Godcast is Dr. Karen O'Donnell, and Karen is the academic dean at Westcott House in Cambridge. We're going to be talking to her about some theology and other matters. So I do hope you enjoy this Godcast. If you do, check out or subscribe to the YouTube channel. There are hundreds of interviews there with theologians, with celebrities, with musicians, with politicians. There really is something there for everybody. But for now, do enjoy this interview with Dr. Karen O'Donnell. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Dr. Karen O'Donnell. Now, Karen is the academic dean at Westcott House in Cambridge. A bit of a mouthful, so perhaps a good place to start, Karen, is to welcome you and say, well, what does that mean? What does an academic dean do? And tell us a bit about Westcott House, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, and thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here. Academic dean. So if you think about training for ministry as having like a stool with three legs, and one part of it is like the formational kind of training bit where you learn, this is how you do a baptism, this is how you organize your pension, this is what it means to apply for a faculty, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if faculties are formational, but yeah, maybe. Then you've got your placement training where you're in parish or you're at chapel in a college, kind of doing the hands-on stuff, getting stuck into things. And then everybody does some academic training. So that might be 2 years of an undergraduate degree. It might be a PhD. It could be all kinds of things in between. And my job is to make sure that people are on the right pathway for their experience, the kind of thing they want to kind of go into ministry with, and to kind of support them through that, make sure that they're thriving. And as part of that, I do some teaching as well. So that's the academic dean bit. Westcott House is a inclusive sacramental Anglican training college. That's our official pitch anyway. It's a training college about 150 years old, based in Cambridge, and yeah, we've got a mix of students here who are ordinands training for ministry. We've got independent students who aren't training for ministry but love a bit of theology and are hanging out to do some of that. And then we've got a really big dispersed, distanced postgraduate community. So that's people from all walks of life, all different kinds of Christian denominations and none at all, who are doing our various online master's degree programs, and then our various PhD programs as well. And I have oversight over all of them as well. So I'm a busy woman.
Yeah. So how many students are there, roughly?
That's a good question. So we've got a residential community of somewhere I need to check the numbers, like 25, something like that. And then we have probably a similar number of students who are in our dispersed community, and then various people who kind of come and go for different things as well. So it's it's a nice kind of space in which it's both easy to get to know everybody, but also it feels like there's a good buzz of different things kind of happening here.
Yeah, I think it's always quite nice to know a little bit about the person behind the kind of the practices. Karen, what led you to the world of academia? Was it something you wanted to do quite early in life? Did you knew that was the road you was going to follow?
Do you know, I didn't. When I was a bit, I became a so let me start that again. My family are Catholic, and my kind of upbringing was like Catholic primary school, Catholic secondary school. You know, all my friends were Catholics. I didn't go to an Anglican church, so I was nearly 30. But I didn't believe in God. It was cultural. It was just what we did. My mum wasn't particularly devout, or devout at all. But it's what we did. It's like where our community lay. And then when I was about 14, I accidentally went to Spring Harvest with a friend. Didn't see that coming. She was like a Methodist. She was like the one non-Catholic person that I was mates with. I wasn't prejudiced. I just didn't have the opportunity. And yeah, we went to Spring Harvest, and on night 2, I became a Christian, felt massively convicted, and had what I would have described as a conversion experience. Although if I look back now, I would say it wasn't so much as a kind of bolt of lightning, but perhaps a kind of questioning of the early teens that had been going on for quite a while. Anyway, I came back, didn't want to go to the Catholic Church, and joined a charismatic evangelical church, which I was in for the next 15 years, which did me so much damage, as well as gave me so much life. But the expectation within that community was that women, if you went to university, you did teaching or nursing. They were the 2 acceptable kind of roles for a woman. So I went to university, did my degree, came back, trained as a teacher, and did that until I got married. My life basically fell apart like 7 years later, and I quit teaching, got a place on a master's degree, did my master's, and was so lucky to get some funding to do a PhD. And so it wasn't my kind of dream, because I didn't really know that I was allowed to have those kinds of dreams as a young woman. And it took a kind of big upheaval in my life to kind of find my way into that. But then I would say that when I went off to do my PhD, I didn't know where to go to church. I'd kind of left the very kind of conservative evangelical context that I'd been in. I didn't want to go back to the Catholic Church. And I ended up at Evensong at Exeter Cathedral, and here I am, academic dean of an Anglican theological college.
It's a funny old world,
It
isn't it?
is, isn't it? I know. And I joke, and I've got some like aging Catholic aunties who still, my mum keeps quite vague about what it is that I do, because they'd be horrified if they knew I wasn't still Catholic.
Well,
Shh, we don't tell them, keep it quiet.
keep it quiet. Don't do any podcasts.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fortunately, I don't think they know what our podcast was.
So, Karen, you very, it'd be remiss of me not picking up on some of the things you'd said there, and considering that, one of your areas of expertise that we're going to talk about is your expertise in trauma theology. You talked about a life in a charismatic evangelical setting and how damaging that was. Are you happy to share how damaging it was?
Yeah. Can I start by saying what I loved about it as
Of
well, though?
course.
Because I learned to love the Bible. I was a worship leader, and I learned to love God. I loved the community for a long time. I loved the community and the sense of belonging that it gave me. And yeah, I was shaped and formed in some good ways through that. But um, when I was in my early 20s, I got married and almost immediately started trying to have a family or have children. And I've written quite publicly about this in my book, The Dark Womb. I suffered a series of pregnancy losses, some of them quite horrific. And I wanted the church to support me in that, and they couldn't. Their kind of response was to say, well, at least you know you can get pregnant. You can always try again. If anyone's listening, please don't say that to people who've just lost babies. It's awful. They could only see a future for me and my husband that was with children. There was, and that resulted in people who wanted to bring kind of words of knowledge about when they thought I was going to have a baby, and yeah. But then when I miscarried again, they would feel awkward about the fact that they brought that, given me that kind of word of knowledge, and therefore just kind of avoided me. And so I started to avoid church because I couldn't worship, I couldn't sing the kind of songs they were singing, and I couldn't face people who were so like disappointed in my body for not doing what they'd prayed it would do. And ultimately, my marriage fell apart, and I left the church, not in that order. And yeah, as I've reflected back on it, I found this kind of imposition of hope, their hope that wasn't yet my hope, just damaged me in ways that I really took me a long time to kind of realize how much damage that had done to my faith and to how I was willing to relate to God. And it taken a long time to fix, not fix, to do some remaking in that as well. So yeah, I mean, I can look back and see that there was so much good in that as well. But yeah, I can also look back and see that actually the expectations, you know, on young women, and the limits that were placed around young women in that particular kind of tradition, not Anglican tradition, yeah, damaged in a whole load of ways the kind of person that I was in my 20s, and I'm quite ashamed of some of the things that I would have said and believed in my 20s. Yeah.
There's such a lot in that, Karen. You've got the trauma of the miscarrying, you've got the trauma of the relationship, you've got the trauma of the church, and you've got the trauma of your relationship with God, your faith.
Yeah.
So how did you go about putting that all back together? Just if you can share some of that.
Yeah, do you know what? I did a PhD. I'm a big advocate for sorting out your faith crises through academic study. It doesn't work for everybody, but for me, study, I did my master's at Nottingham University, my PhD at Exeter, so not in kind of seminary context or theological colleges. They were both incredibly formational for me, and I probably didn't even realize what I was doing until kind of later on. But what I was really doing was I'd never lost my faith. I'd still believed in God, and I still believe that fundamentally God was a good God, and but there was this massive disconnect. And so yeah, I threw myself into theology that I didn't even know existed, and in the first kind of term of my PhD, my supervisor, who's this incredible feminist theologian, said, "Oh, by the way, have you read this thing?" And I went and read it, and it turned out it was Serene Jones's book, Trauma and Grace. I'd never read anything on trauma before, and in it she has a chapter on her own experience of pregnancy loss. I'd never read any theology of pregnancy loss that wasn't God's got good plans for your life, don't worry about it. It blew me away, and I was like, that's the field I want to work in. So I'd gone to do a PhD on Mary. I did not do a PhD on Mary. I ended up doing the work in trauma theology that was both my academic work and also my kind of remaking work. And it's it's an ongoing process. Nobody's fully formed, and I'm certainly not. But yeah, for me, I found, and I've continued to find, and I try to communicate to my ordinands that the academic study is a spiritual experience and a formational experience if you can allow it to be and not kind of resist it too much.
Yeah. Gosh, I've got lots of questions going around in my head. But one of them is if we could look at the trauma of miscarrying
Yeah.
and uh, myself and my wife, we lost a baby many years ago. And I just think about how we felt and how I felt. Was a sense of loss that is very different to what I found very different to losing my father, for example. Can you unpack that a little bit and what you found in your own
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, there's something about the loss of a life that's not yet formed, where actually the life that it has kind of exists in your hopes. And when you're pregnant, it doesn't really matter kind of the stage of pregnancy. Parents often imagine the life of the child. Um, when somebody who's an adult, or even somebody, when children who've lived die, you've got memories to celebrate, right? There's always something good, even if people die in horrific circumstances. People will often want funerals to be a celebration. You don't get a funeral with a pregnancy loss. You might do if it's stillbirth, so if it's quite a late on kind of loss. But most pregnancy losses take place before 14 weeks. It's treated as medical waste. But it's a body in which we've already imbued hope and dreams and plans and relationships. You might have told other children that you were expecting, or grandparents. So it's a little bundle that has just all of these hopes kind of pinned to it and dreams. And when it goes, you're left in limbo, because often you're not offered any kind of ritual way of dealing with it in the same way that you would with a funeral. Or, you know, if you're in the Jewish tradition, like sitting shiva or something like that. And so one of the things I felt I needed to do was uh, was to just do something after I'd lost multiple pregnancies. And I went up on a hillside with a couple of friends and had the number of balloons for the number of pregnancies I'd lost. This is very environmentally poor practice, so I apologize. It was a long time ago. And released the balloons with a kind of goodbye that went with it. And actually, it was quite cathartic. But I just needed to do something. Nothing had been offered. I wasn't in a tradition where rituals were part of the kind of thing that we do, but actually we're human beings are ritual beings, and so I think there's something very profound about not being able to have a funeral, not having any kind of traditional markers for how we deal with this. You know, it's only in the last couple of years that you've been able to buy a kind of sorry you lost your baby kind of card in Clinton's or something like that, you know. That's actually a really big step forward. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the idea that there might be some kind of cultural script, whether it's in church or not, for how we recognize this is really powerful. I think we underestimate that.
It's just fascinating talking to you. I didn't do any of those things that you said, but I do remember my brother was standing as a Tory MP when we lost the child, and I delivered I wasn't an advocate really of what he was doing, but I delivered leaflets. I walked and walked and walked for days and days.
Yeah,
I delivered, when I look back, I think, gosh, that was your kind of way of
yeah,
just processing it all.
yeah. Because
Um,
movement makes meaning.
yeah,
It's really I've got a book coming out later this month, which is on practices for trauma survivors, spiritual practices for trauma survivors. One of the practices that I've advocated is this idea that movement makes meaning, and that
yeah,
if as you're processing, you need to move, whatever that is, whether it's a slow walk down a river, or if it's walking the dog, but whatever, or if it's gardening or swimming or running. It's not running for me, but the very process of getting your body moving actually enables your brain and your spirit to do something necessary, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. A friend of mine, I don't know if you know Professor Helen King,
I do.
who
Wonderful
is
woman. Yeah.
she is a wonderful woman, and she was. People who might be enjoying this podcast should check out one that just came out a few weeks ago. She's got a book out called Immaculate
Oh,
Forms,
it's so good.
and we were talking about some of the historical kind of ideas around the womb.
Mm.
Never thought I'd be doing this, but I was, and thoroughly enjoyed it. But actually, about the historical understanding of when a baby becomes a baby, when it's fully formed, etc. And I suppose a question for people who might be watching this who have experienced this, the big question, where's God in a miscarriage? It's something that people will ask, isn't it? What would your response be to that?
God isn't in miscarriages. God doesn't cause miscarriages to happen. God doesn't fail to prevent them from happening. But then, if you believe that, you have to believe the flip side, which means that God doesn't cause babies to be born either. And that's really hard, because we're much more comfortable with the idea that, oh, God bless me with a child. If you're going to say that, the flip side of it is God did not bless me with the one that I was already carrying. So my perspective is that God isn't in miscarriages. God isn't in actually biological processes at all. Um, and that so God doesn't kind of fail to act. God doesn't cause these things to happen. Um, for a long time, I felt the idea of solidarity was just so insufficient. I was like, well, I don't care. So what if God's alongside me? I don't fix anything. But I'm actually kind of coming around to the idea of that now. And that, like, in hindsight, was certainly my experience. Is that, how did I experience God in my miscarriage? I experienced it with the one friend who came and sobbed with me on the kitchen floor for hours and hours, and then made me a cup of tea and got me a fresh set of pajamas. Like, that's where God was. It wasn't in church. It wasn't in the people who wanted to lay hands on me and pray for another
Mm.
pregnancy. It was in the person that loved me and cared for me in the moments when I was absolutely kind of wordless and just kind of pure emotion. She did me. She was God. God nudged her. That's how I would kind of talk about God kind of nudging her into action, and that's where God cared for me in that experience.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's enough, Alex, but it's all I've got.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's good. It's helpful. And just moving things on a little
Yeah.
bit, Karen, you know, I'm a liberal Catholic, but one of my best mates is a charismatic evangelical, a window washer, as I call him.
Well, you can't see his Alex's hand movements there.
And and just think about some of the recent trauma, think about Soul Survivor,
Yeah.
and also, I'm a member of General Synod,
Mm.
listening to people's stories and kind of almost endless line of people who
Right.
have suffered trauma through relationships or people who've let them down or safeguarding issues. And on a wider context, Karen, what's your assessment of the Church of England at the moment? And I mean, and anybody who's only listening, Karen shrugged her shoulders. It seems such a hot potato. It seems to be something that gets moved from one person to another.
Right.
My feeling is I don't think anybody quite is taking full responsibility for it. Well, where are you with it all?
Um, so one of the things that I think is common to these experiences of all the different kind of things that you've named there is places where men's authority goes unchecked. Like, let's be honest about this. I think this is a sin of the patriarchy that imbues men, particularly men with kind of religious power, with a particular kind of authority that's spiritual, way more influential than we perhaps want to give it credit for, and goes unchecked. So certainly, I think in Soul Survivor, I think that's what you see. There is unchecked authority, insufficient oversight. I would say that was the case in the kind of church tradition that I was in. Is that, you know, people who were leading the church had no qualifications to do it, and no training, no oversight. In a million years now, I would never join a church like that, having experienced that and seen the kind of stories that have come out from other churches. I don't think the Church of England takes safeguarding seriously enough. I think until we have a really robust theology of safeguarding, and that's more than, um, do unto others as you would do to yourself, something deeper than that.
Mm.
I don't think the church it won't be more than a box ticking exercise. And I say that having gone through all the safeguarding training, I've found some of it really great. All of our ordinands do it. I'm not saying safeguarding training is bad. What I am saying is I think safeguarding training on its own is insufficient as it currently stands because it doesn't have a theological underpinning. But I would say that, right? I'm a theologian. And yeah, I don't think anyone wants to take responsibility for it because it's terrifying. I think it's terrifying. And I genuinely believe that as we've started to kind of take account of spiritual abuse alongside sexual forms of abuse, which have obviously dominated, and quite rightly so, our discourse for a number of years, we're only scratching the surface. I think when people start to understand what spiritual abuse is, they'll realize, oh, that's what happened to me, or yeah, that was definitely my experience in the church that I was in at the time. So, and I think people in leadership know that and don't want to be the person that's responsible for having to kind of unpeel the rest of the envelope and kind of see what's inside. So, I don't, I work quite closely with a couple of survivors groups who are not particularly impressed with the way in which church handles these issues. I think interestingly, I've just had a master's student, my final master's student from Sarum College, which is where I used to work. I'll give her a little shout out, Sarah Pritchard. She's just finished this phenomenal master's thesis, which was supposed to be out about how can the church resource post-traumatic remaking. and she used this phrase, if the body of Christ is a traumatized body, how can it help recover traumatized bodies? Her conclusion was,
Just say that again, Karen, so people
sorry,
can, because that's pretty good, that.
Yeah, thanks. That was in my book. So the body, so I think what I originally said was the body of Christ is a traumatized body because it includes traumatized bodies. And in that, I really meant the ecclesial body of Christ, the church. But she took this further and thought about the Eucharistic body of Christ and the historical body of Christ, the actual body of Jesus. So she's done this fantastic piece of work. But at the end of it, she wanted to conclude by saying, yeah, the church should do X, Y, and Z, and that'd be really great for the post-traumatic remaking of trauma survivors. Her conclusion was actually the church is not a safe place for trauma survivors because it is fundamentally broken in and of itself. It is traumatized itself. And she points to the different factions, the different ruptures that are within the church. Ruptures are kind of classic motif in trauma theology, a classic theme. Different ruptures, she just fundamentally concluded it wasn't a place of safety, and safety is the key aspect for beginning this post-traumatic remaking. And she was really quite stunned with herself. It's like, oh, this is not where I thought this was going, but actually this is where the research has taken me, and I think she's right.
It's fascinating stuff because as a job in vicar,
Yeah,
I do. We see lots of broken people come to our context in urban Burnley,
yeah,
but alongside that, we are a church of deep historical trauma, and it's a huge, for me personally, I find it's a huge Achilles heel for me. It's kind of, yeah, come on in, but come in this way, and we're trying to, but on this side of it's not that great over here either.
right,
And it is a
yeah.
worry, and I'm not sure what the solution is. I don't think anybody is at the
No,
moment.
no, but I think the solution is, I mean, one of the things Sarah points out in her work is that individual churches are doing really excellent things, but that until there's systemic institutional change, which means that we genuinely take seriously what's been happening
Mm.
as a systemic thing, and not as like, even now still kind of, oh, this was a one-off here and this is a one-off there, which is still really the vibes that you get. Then none of us are really going to be able to deal with it. You could point to our histories of colonization and oppression and mission that's done more harm than good. The trauma is endless,
Mm.
and that's horrifying, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't, I'm one of the kind of most, I blow my own trumpet slightly, most prominent voices in trauma theology in the UK. I don't know how to fix it, but also I know nobody's asking me.
No.
No, which is sad, really sad. Can we end with something more cheerful?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, hang on. I've got a few.
Oh no, go for it. Yeah.
I know I said half an hour, but
That's okay. That's fine. I've got time.
you got to forgive me because I am dyslexic and I need to look up this word that I want to ask you about, which you teach. It's about well, I've not asked any of my questions,
That's all right.
that I was going to do, but so you teach like the philosophy of learning, don't you? It's got a funny name.
Pedagogy.
Pedagogy, yeah.
That's the
I'd
one.
never heard of it,
Oh,
Karen. I
okay.
had to look it up, and
That's all right.
I just want to ask you about this
Yeah.
because you are clearly an academic. What I'm enjoying about this conversation is you're very relational. You're very
Mhm.
engaging. All those kind of things that appeal to me as a non-academic.
Yeah. Good.
So dyslexic,
Mhm.
less school, no qualifications, working class.
Mhm.
And some people will know that I've raised a private members motion for a national strategy for people from a working
Yeah.
class background. What I'm not saying is that people from working class backgrounds are not academic, but if you could tinker with the strategy of the academic process for ordinands, for me, I personally would love to see an apprenticeship program.
Mhm.
And I know that there will be some theologians and academics will be like, "Oh, hang on, you just make us redundant." But what's your approach to this? And do you think there's a reason there's reason in my argument?
I think there is reason in your argument. I think probably one of the things that the Church of England needs to do is stop assuming that everyone goes through BAP to do the same thing. Because I've got, I've had ordinands who are like, I'm called to be a chaplain, but I have to go through this plus my curacy, pretending like I want to be a parish priest, and I don't. I want to be a chaplain. And various people. There are various roles within the Church of England clergy, and we don't allow people to start thinking about them until quite late down the line. So that's one of the things I think would be useful, and then that we might actually have opportunity to tailor training in more bespoke ways for more bespoke kinds of pathways. And we just don't do enough of that at the moment. And I say that as somebody who runs nearly 38 different degree programs. They're not, but they're often variations of the same thing. There's not huge amounts of difference in them. I would also say that I think that flipping age restriction on the years of training is one of the absolute worst things in the Church of England's approach to its ordinance. You cannot make a decision about how many years of training somebody needs based on their age. And it's not fair, because it would mean that somebody who's in their early 40s doesn't get, but perhaps left school with no qualifications, doesn't get the opportunity to do the kind of study and have the kind of learning opportunities that at a pace that suits them. I'm not necessarily saying everybody needs to do the BA, but that actually perhaps doing a diploma over 3 years with a good amount of support and pacing through it would be fantastic. But that's currently not possible, or less possible. I've actually got a couple of students this year who technically should only have 2 years, and we've managed to convince should have 3, both of whom left school with GCSEs and are very excited about study, which is wonderful, and we're really happy to support them. But also, a good proportion of our students are neurodivergent. Okay, sometimes that means they need to take longer. But also, there's this idea that if you've already got an undergraduate theology degree, you only therefore need 2 years of training. Well, you can do a master's in 2 years, but just because you've got an undergraduate theology degree doesn't mean you don't need more than 2 years kind of formational experience and training. So I think that kind of whole criteria about how we make decisions about how much training people get, how much opportunities they get within theological colleges or institutions or courses is just bonkers. It doesn't work. So I would be very supportive of any movement to rethink that, and to rethink how we decide what kind of training people get. My preference would be to have everybody here for as long as possible, but then I'm a theologian and I would say that, right? I just think that most of my students who've come in this year have come here for 3 years, and that's just wonderful. We can do so much more over 3 years of full-time training than we can over 2, obviously. And the same would be true over 3 years part-time training than we get then over 2. So I just think all that criteria isn't helpful and doesn't really respond very well to the individual person. I think academic, in the sense of academic's such a difficult word. I think learning how to study the Bible and learning some good theology and learning how to think is really important. It's really important for everybody. It doesn't mean everybody needs to do a PhD, but I want everybody who is in priestly ministry to know how to do that.
Yeah. And hopefully we're both a good advert for that. I'm not. I'm a theologian.
Of course you are. Yes.
But I'm not an academic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
And I would say, my granddad laid roads. I'm not from a super academic family. My mum was the first one to go to university in her entire family, which was amazing. But yeah, I'm you know, I can't claim working class origins, but, you know, certainly my family is not a super academic family, and I work hard. You know, I'm not a natural. I have to work hard at it. I don't read quick. My brain
Yeah.
works quite slow. You know, things take me a lot of time. But I love it.
Yeah. Karen, I've loved talking to you. I've got two questions because
Yeah.
I just want to get them in because I do want us to finish on something joyful. But first, the first question you can probably ask them together: should men be doing feminist theology? And secondly, for me, the joy in trauma, dealing with trauma, it's difficult to say that, isn't it? Where's the joy in trauma? But there definitely is. We have a number of people who come to our church who have had very traumatic lives, who are now living in relationship with Jesus Christ, and they are flourishing, and that's wonderful to see. So, from your own perspective, if you could offer a comment on both those, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah. Should men do feminist theology? Yes. Right? The patriarchy is bad for everybody, every single person. I'm speaking at Luther King House in a couple of weeks' time for the Women's Voices Saturday with Liz Shercliffe, and my paper is called Smashing the Patriarchy. Because patriarchy is a sin. Oh, it's a result of the fall. People are like, oh, patriarchy is in the Bible. Yeah, but not because it's a good thing, you know? There's all whole kinds of things in the Bible. That doesn't mean we should be doing them. Patriarchy is one of them. So yeah, men should be doing feminist theology, that men should be engaging with it because it's good, it'll be good for them. It's about, taking our experiences seriously. It's about understanding, our relationship to God, via our own experiences and via the experiences of those around us. It's about recognizing that feminism is about seeking justice for people. Like, why wouldn't you be interested in that? That's a great thing. So yeah, do some feminist theology, and if you don't know what to read, send me an email and I'll tell you what to read. That's fine. And where's the joy in trauma? Look, I think there may be joy in trauma, but the thing is, you've got to let people find it for themselves. The 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 problem comes is when you try and impose your own joy on other people. But if you let people find it for themselves, it's the same with hope, really. We often want to rush in and say, but it's all right because we've got a hope in Jesus. I'm not saying that's not true, but it is a really unhelpful thing to say to people when they're, really struggling. Hold it to yourself, like keep your own hope in Jesus strong, and let them come to it themselves, because they'll have moments where they still believe that, and that'll kind of come back round. And if it takes a long time, it takes a long time. It doesn't matter. God's not going anywhere.
Yeah. And just remind people about your book that's coming out.
Yes. So it's coming out later this month in October. It's called Survival: Radical Spiritual Practices for Trauma Survivors. It's full of really good stuff, but like super accessible, so anyone can pick it up and read it. It's not very long as well, and it's a whole load of different practices that I think might be useful. So they're a bit controversial. Practice of unforgiveness might be good for a trauma survivor. Practice of anger. Practice of eating good food, less controversial, that one. Practice of rest. I've got in there like an angry rosary if anyone's interested in mixing up their rosary experiences. There's a practice of pleasure. And when I say pleasure, I hope you can see my eyebrows going. Yeah, so I'm super excited. It's had some fantastic kind of early reviews, which I'm really proud about. And yeah, it'll be out towards the end of October with SCM Press, but you can also get it on the big internet one as well.
Fabulous. Well, Karen, it's been great chatting to you.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, this has been fun.
Yeah, I think so. And I hope other people have found it fun as well. And if you have, then check out the Godcast. There are hundreds of interviews out there. Do check out my own book, Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, Pre-Story, published by Harper North. That's out in all good bookshops. But for now, it remains for me to say, Karen, thank you for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Alex.